All right, friends, today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. This video is going to be more philosophical in nature, and yet it is the backbone concept of astrology. So we'll be talking about the masculine and the feminine principle, and we'll be exploring what exactly are they referring to in terms of what it means in astrology and how astrology itself is a systemized symbolic language where at its core, it's explaining the nature of existence as well as its existing entities. And I feel that I have to clean and clear the ground in order to be able to build up this argument. And that's because in our time, this topic is very easy to misunderstand. It's easy to misunderstand it before it even begins. And I say this because even the words masculine and feminine, when we utter them, most people immediately hear gender. They hear identity. They hear social roles and power dynamics. And of course, cultural expectations and the social norms and roles that we have. And once when the argument goes there, it can become emotionally charged very fast. It becomes defensive, polarized, and moralized. And I don't want to go there. That's why I have to clear some things and very slowly build this argument up. Because I have to detach some of our perception from what these two terms mean to be able to go where we're trying to go. And this is what I've noticed when we individually or collectively have these overreactions. Itself is giving us a clue. And that's because the things that feel confusing or threatening, like a mere concept, is because the way that we're understanding the concept or what we're attaching to it is not touching the core. It's showing us the faulty ways that this concept is supposed to carry the world on its back, or the world is trying to carry a concept that's not connected to it. And it's for this reason that, again, I have to build up this discussion for us to see what the feminine and the masculine principle is in astrology as nature of existence, as the most significant aspect of the existing facets of the world and within ourselves as individuals, which then seeps into culture and etc. Now, I know many of you tune in to watch transit videos, and there'll be more of those coming up. And if you guys want to stay updated with those videos, please subscribe so YouTube sends you a notification. Now, let's get right into the topic of our video today. So as I just said, what I want to talk about today is much more fundamental than gender. I want us to explore how these concepts, how this principle of the feminine and the masculine are telling us how existence itself works. And it's worth noting across space and time, across all cultures, they have all reached for the symbolic language for these two principles. And that's because what they all have in common is that we're all trying to understand something about the nature of existence and its existing entities. And astrology matters here as one of those systems, because not only astrology has a power to tell us something about who we are as people, but it has preserved the symbolic language and its profundity. This is why it's considered the occult. These things are deeply embedded within it, so you need extra attention. You need to summon that Mercury to the fullest extent, to make that leap, to reach in that way to understand them. In many ways, the system of astrology is giving us an access and a glimpse into reality through its symbolism. Because at its core, astrology is showing us the larger processes of existence. So we have reduced it to describing personality and the feeling of events. But at its core, it has the power to describe these bigger functions rather than just identity and personality. So in this video, I'm not asking the question of what does it mean to be feminine or masculine. I'm asking what is the feminine and the masculine principle actually describing about the nature of existence. And of course, is existing entities and the objects of the world, which we are part of that. So let's systematically get into this discussion. So if we break existence down to its most basic level, we'll see that existence is not a thing. It's not an object that sits somewhere fully formed. But this is the image that we have on our mind, in our minds, right? We have the universe, then we have all of these galaxies, formulated solar systems within that galaxy that are just there. The universe is just there. All these existing factors are just there. But if we pay attention, if we zoom out, existence is an activity. It is something that's continuously happening. That means to exist is to be in motion. And all forms in formulation, in their formulation, and the objects that they become that exist as seemingly solid and static things are all in motion. And in fact, we could say it is the activity and the motion of them that gives rise to their arrangement and their shape, to the configuration that they are. And that means that nothing in existence is devoid of motion. It's in fact their makeup as motion and motion types that holds their form and formulation in balance. It's this that allows it to be a coherent expression as the something and the thingness of the world. And when we come down to our own plane of existence on Earth, it is this balance itself in different types of motion interacting with each other, different types of activities that gives rise to what we call life. I mean, think about it. When someone dies, what happens? The first thing, that external animation of them is done. And we consider that thing as no longer existing. Even though that decomposition part, there's still activity till all of that goes, then we don't have life. But the definition of life itself is denoting activity, motion. And before moving forward, it's worth looking at the fact that everything that exists, like take your own body, for example, it's an expression of a point of equilibrium. And when this equilibrium gets disturbed, the existence of that entity becomes threatened. Your body becomes threatened. There's a balance point for your body, for your mind. And usually when some external force, some external activity or emotions imposed on it that disturbs this, that's when you start to see deterioration of your own activity. My point is, this is present on every level, from the quanta to the most macro, because this is the nature of existence, and existence is always iterating and reiterating itself. So going back to this point of balance, the things that are expressed in this world, they're describing a point of balance. And that means motion itself has to be proportionate, in proportion. And that means that's what's giving everything its rhythm, proportion and rhythm of motion. And this is where the concept of masculine and feminine come into play now. And that is to say, the feminine and the masculine are articulating something about the nature of existence as its activity. So if existence itself is the activity, these two principles are now different motion types that are creating that differentiation. And at its core, I want to remind you again, we're not talking about genitalia, we're not talking about bodies, and we're not talking about social roles. The feminine and the masculine emerge as descriptions of two fundamental motion types in existence, as the activities of existence, and they are contingent and they must cooperate. And this is necessary for anything to come into existence. This is necessary for anything to be formulated into anything. And one of the biggest mistakes that we make conceptually is to assume that differentiation means opposites or opposition. It doesn't. If we pay attention, that's usually saying something about our own subjective need, which is the need for categories, definition, and discernible pattern at our level of understanding. In reality, contrasts don't have to imply conflict, and difference doesn't have to imply separation. Often these contrasts are actually talking about contingency and a spectrum that has a continuity. Again, to think about this concept, to bring it down to earth, again, I want you to think about arrivals and departures. Because if you want to understand arrival, you also have to understand what departure is. They are a contingent concept. Departure only has a meaning because arrival precedes it. And in reality, they're not competing, nor does one supersede another one and cancel the other one out. They are contingent, occurring within a continuum. They are co-defining in terms of what it means to be somewhere, to be positioned, and to be located. This is how our consciousness understands what it means, one facet of being in space-time. And that means that presence can only exist in the relationship that exists between these two concepts. And if you think about it, we live inside of this dynamic every day in every facet of our lives, whether we want to name it or not. You're arriving from somewhere, going inside your home. As the moment that you step in, you have departed, you have arrived. Whereas a second ago, you had arrived to your door and you have departed what was behind you. This is continuous. And let me make this a little bit more explicit about the topic we're talking about and how this is related to the feminine and the masculine. So let's start connecting all the dots more explicitly about our topic. So when we talk about the feminine principle, or that which is feminine, we're describing a motion type which is inward. We're talking about inward motion. It's about pulling in, receiving, containing, holding. And if you think about it, this type of motion becomes necessary. It's a means, or it's an activity that allows accumulation and integration to occur. This is our capacity to take something in and to hold it. And if you go one step further, this is also the means to expand space. Space itself, some people describe space as something that's static in its state of beingness. Others theoretically explain this as something that is constantly expanding, like the expanding universe. But it is the feminine principle that is permitting this expansion to occur because of its inward motion and the types of activities that it permits. And if we think about this, this is the potential for more content and expressions of existence to come into being. This is also where potential lives. So as we can see, the feminine principle is talking about a function of existence that allows different facets of existence to be held together. This is the space where they come into relation. And because of this, there's a possibility now for emergence of form, that configuration that I was talking about earlier. The feminine principle, we can also think about it as an activity that gestates, which is essentially a means to bring different parts of existence that can come into a balanced relation or a relational dynamic to come together and to be held in this field, which we would call in our human realm a form of nurturance, so that something can grow. And if you think about it, this concept of the feminine is not about passivity, the way that it's been described about the nature of the feminine and the masculine, that the feminine is something passive, dark, dirty. It's worth thinking about where those ideas come from. And if we were to think philosophically and from the perspective of when we're talking about existence, what are we talking about? We'll start to see how much of that is part of the human agenda, the hegemony, the coercion of power of human systems, which is beyond the scope of this video. But I'd love to talk about that because even that has a symbolic representation in astrology. But for now, my point is that the feminine principle, as one of the two primary functions of existence, is not talking about weakness. Like without this function, this activity, this motion type, nothing in existence could come together to take form. That means existence could not exist, period. And you know what? Let me actually indirectly address the issue of identity politics of our day for just a moment, just to show you how far and distant these concepts are and how they've been co-opted and misused over time to describe something completely different. And I'll just say this. If you're a woman or a man, I want you to look down at your body and I just want to ask you, do you have a shape? Do you have a form to your body? Is this an arrangement of some type? And I would assume that almost 100% of us will say yes. And I want us to realize that form is made of a soup of protons, neutrons, atoms that have been formulated into cells, where all the parts are pulled together, pulled in into one space that is permitting your existence. And the point that I'm trying to make, that these modes of operation, these activities and motion types are present everywhere in this thing, in me, in you. We're just talking about different proportions and rhythms and balances. So the function of the feminine principle is not limited to woman. So when we're talking about the feminine principle, we're not talking about woman per se. It's a property of everything that exists. That's why it exists. Is the property of existence itself in its existing form, in its manifested form. It's part of the expression of everything, even the verbal expressions that we have. Are we pulling things in with our verbal expressions or are we pushing them out? Everything has this function in it. The difference, again, is only a matter of proportion. Now, let's move to the masculine principle. I hold something and then I forget to put it down. I'm putting it down. That was a lip gloss, by the way. So the masculine principle. And when we talk about the masculine principle, we're talking about that motion type that is about outwardness. So it's talking about forward, upward, and outward motion from that interiority, which was the feminine principle. So the masculine principle now comes to be about the way our consciousness understands it and can attach a word to it to describe it. It becomes about expression. And if you think about it, this process inherently must include the process of differentiation. It creates separateness. Its mere existence is to separate itself from that interiority, that internal, to go external and outward. It's the departure from the point that it had arrived to. It's that potential that existed that can now depart. So if the feminine principle is about holding, being contained, the space itself that is containing in that merged state, the masculine principle comes to be about differentiation of that merged state. And I want you to think about when an egg and a sperm meet. They are both talking about a potentiality. The moment that they merge, that cell differentiation begins to happen. And it's growing. It's moving externally and outwards. And you can even see it in the appearance of the body, where the stomach starts to protrude outwards. That's what I'm saying. Existence iterates and reiterates itself on every level. The essence is showing up in the appearance. The appearance is always saying something about the essence. And if you think about it, when we think about now the existing forms of existence, everything is separate, everything's differentiated. This is me, this is you. And human beings talking about moralization, polarization, and everything I was trying to describe at the beginning of the video, they have given these functions, which are value-free in themselves, a particular kind of value. They have scaled it. So on the negative spectrum, masculinity is seen as being aggressive, as being isolating, as being dominating. But this isn't inherently about aggression. It's merely a function where without it, nothing, no expression could come into existence. This has nothing, again, to do with male or female. And again, we can't limit this, just the masculine principle belongs to men. On a cellular level, every female is going through the same thing. In our activities and our daily tasks and daily movement is occurring on every level. And again, what we're seeing is that feminine and masculine are existing in every entity with just different proportions, which creating its own kind of rhythm. And as human beings, this is entrenched as part of our instinct to understand this very implicitly, subconsciously. And when there's an imbalance between the feminine and the masculine in something or someone, when that rhythm and proportion is off, when one is overdeveloped and another one's underdeveloped or neglected, because as human beings, as conscious beings, we also need to cultivate certain things. We need to be adaptable to our life circumstances. So you could naturally have more of that receptive feminine quality, but life has placed you in a situation that you must survive. That means you have to adapt and understand how to nurture and cultivate that masculine principle that's also invested within you. But going back to us having that instinctual, subconscious understanding, when there's an imbalance, we pick it up right away. And what we're actually picking up is the inconsistency and the lack of adaptability in that person. Like till today, we'll socialize men to have only one crayon in the crayon box, which is I'm angry, or the other word, I'm pissed. But when you actually sit with that human being, when you can get through the layers, they are looking for security. They are looking for love. They are looking for connectivity and relatability and belonging, which all belong to the feminine principle. It is inherently there, but we can mess up these proportions that are already within. The way that we brought these social roles into the picture, that a man just does this because he's being over-identified with the masculine principle. You just go out to work. No relational dynamic, no connection, connectivity, and closeness to the family. They're being denied of that. And for a woman to traditionally have been denied of the external facets and sphere and domains of life has created other sets of crises. We have come to really misunderstand these principles and how it is invested in us. We have dumbed it down. It has been dumbed down to be able to actually control the culture, the social milieu, But again, to bring it down to earth, we feel it in ourselves when we don't have that rhythm and proportion of it that's already invested in us. When it becomes imbalanced, we feel it as burnout. It comes out as feeling disenchanted with life. That's when we actually look around and things have been polarized in our relationship, in our neighborhoods, in our families. And when it gets into that state, we'll see that we have lost the adaptability and we become super rigid. And the point here is that when one motion dominates the other one, when they get out of their proportional dynamic, they lose the rhythm. And what we're essentially talking about is the loss of coherence within the system itself, whether if that's the system of the body or if that's society. Because again, these principles iterate and reiterate on every level. Nature, existence, is the ultimate accountant. Disproportion and balance of the femininity and the masculinity that I'm talking about is supposed to be in every existing entity, and it cannot be disrupted because it disrupts what that system and that entity is about. And you know what? I want to bring this up. Fair enough. I have met women who are supposed to be feminine. By every definition that we have, they are more masculine than any men I have ever met. And then I have met men who are by definition supposed to be masculine on every level, from their level of empathy for their need for security and safety. They are more feminine than any female that I have met. And what happens is that we either have to readjust that within ourselves based on our external circumstances and how we need to survive, or we find people who are complementary to that. So if I am more masculine inherently, that's the balance, the proportion, and the rhythm in my being. If I'm masculine, then I need someone who complements in terms of someone who's embodying that feminine principle, and vice versa. But this is not about men are masculine, women are feminine, because you see the variations in different proportions, balance and rhythm in different human beings, in both bodies and everything in between. And I would even take it a little bit further. I guess I'm getting into this talk a little bit, but I think it's important for us to make the distinction between what we're talking about as existential functions and human-made concepts that are hijacking this concept, and they actually have a different agenda. And we can see this when we start to attach feminine and masculine to identities. In fact, the way that we understand gender today, the way we try to define it, the way we have designated social roles around it, it's what's causing suffering. It's not the feminine and the masculine. It's bastardization of these concepts. And that's because we want to isolate one motion type into one person. And in fact, when we do that, we deny the person their full humanity. What we try to do in that case is to freeze this dynamic process into roles, into bodies, into fixed identities, as if identities are fixed in themselves. It's turning these reciprocal, contingent, existential functions into fragmented expectations and mere performances of masculinity and femininity. And if you think about it, when we get to that point, we are actually acting against our very nature. It's how we have come to lose sight of how existence works, what nature itself is about. This is how we have lost our connection to nature. It's when we have to prescribe how people should behave artificially, rather than allowing nature to prescribe how we ought to be. And the confusion that we see today is not just a confusion about self and identities. It's about confusion about the nature of existence. It's about misunderstanding of our own nature. This era of loneliness and depression and mental health issues that we human beings are constantly talking about, it goes so deep, so deep. We're being asked to take on roles and be these types of human beings that were never meant to actually exist in that way. We're being asked to stop moving, to stop receiving, or at least, I mean, like, if you have to just be the super masculine or super feminine, just deny half of yourself, half of your makeup, to deny half the power that has been invested in you. And we are seeing the consequences of this on every level that we can think of in society. And you know what? To me, this is where astrology as a system becomes so valuable. Because if we look at astrology as a system, we don't see it assigning feminine or masculine to like a particular gender, like this is a female chart, this is a masculine chart. It's all encompassing. Every chart has both of these elements through and through as its backbone, and then as its reiteration over and over. I'll just give you some very mundane example. We have two feminine planets, Venus and Moon. We have two very masculine planets, Sun and Mars. We have one planet that is mildly masculine, Jupiter. We have a planet that is mildly feminine, Saturn. We have a planet that is neither feminine or masculine, Mercury. And not to mention, each of these planets will have a feminine sign and a masculine sign, except the two luminaries, Sun and Moon, which are actually a contingent pair again. So the entire charts over and over is showing this dynamic. It distributes these functions across every planet, every sign, and if you really think deeply about it, every house is a particular kind of space that is either holding this receptive inward motion or this externalizing factor. That's what it's accommodating. And to go a little bit further, think about the moon. It describes containment and continuity. Show me one man who doesn't need this. The nurturance. Venus represents relationship merging and cohesion. Again, show me one man who doesn't need this. Now let's take Mars, the masculine principle, the most masculine. It describes assertion, ignition, initiation, movement. Show me one woman who lacks this quality. Again, the point is that they come in different proportion, balances with their own rhythm. So all these planets and their symbols, they're invested within all of us as a part of our own drive. And we have to navigate them coherently to be this coherent system. And that's whether if we're born with XX or XY or any sequences of these chromosomes. I mean, if you think about it, no one really lives inwardly, completely and solely, or just outwardly. We're talking about insanity when that happens. And this is why I respect astrology, a system and its knowledge that has been passed down generation to generation, just containing this information through symbols. It has preserved this symbolic literacy, unlike our cultures that have bastardized them. Politics, don't even get me started. Literature that has become polarized, forget about it. Astrology through and through is showing us existence as a relational field of becoming, as an activity that is constantly in motion. It's talking about its proportion, its rhythm, where the feminine and the masculine principle are describing the nature of existence, and the ascendant as the nature of the existing entity emerging into life. And you know what? You might come into this world with more of that feminine or masculine quality, but then the rest of your chart is saying, does this need to be changed over time? The trials and tribulations of life, the things that you come into relation that throw off this proportionality, and then the trials and the tribulation of finding your equilibrium again. And I talked a little bit more than I was expecting to. I was not expecting to get to the social dynamics and all of that, but I think it's important for us to understand the profundity and the origin of these concepts, which go so much further than these stupid shorts that we watch where people are like, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? And you're just like listening to these definitions and you're sitting there and you're like, have I gone insane? What is happening? But let's close this video off. So in closing, we can say, when we returned to the feminine and the masculine with this understanding, with the profundity of what they're trying to describe, we're inevitably going to be positioned in a way that we have to see that we're not talking about identities, that identities are merely an expression of the proportions and the rhythm of these two motions that's invested within all of us, that the feminine and the masculine are not mere traits that we have to perform. They are not oppositional. They are not in conflict in nature as nature. They can be what they have always been, what they are, which is a process of motion and how existence exists and its existing forms can come into being, how existence sustains itself and expands. And I want you to keep in mind, if you go to every tradition across this planet, whether if it's polytheistic or monotheistic, when you keep digging and digging, at first, there's this undifferentiated, the ultimate being, the ultimate consciousness, the oneness. And then somehow the one had to split into two. And it's the interaction of the two that gives rise to the entirety of existence. This is the basic formula behind every myth of existence. If you look at it, human beings have understood this from the dawn of time. I don't know why we're misunderstanding it now. And when these functions can cooperate, life is held together. Whether we're talking about our physical health or whether we're talking about our relational dynamics, it's when they lack that proportionality that we lose coherence of our life, our health, our vitality, our sense of being, our belonging. And that's when we collapse. And that's when coherence of our social dynamics collapse, where culture comes to exist as something that is outside of us, rather than something that can hold us like the feminine principle and let us exist amongst each other. And I'm hoping the less we bastardize these concepts and the more that we actually try to understand the depth of it, we can begin to restore the right proportions, the coherence, the contingency, the continuity, all of it which allows existence and humanity to endure what it means to exist. And that's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.